My name is Charles Harmon. I was raised in a little country town in south central Illinois. Population in that town was 350 through the week and 1,500 plus on the weekends. My mother's father had 5 brothers, and whenever they moved into Illinois, the state gave each one of them a square mile of property, and they had those 6 square miles of property bordering each other, and that's the way they made their living, was farming and what have you. To get to the point, on the weekends everybody would go to church on Sunday morning, and after church all of those boys gathered around at my grandfather's place, and the women would already be there cooking and taking care of things for Sunday lunch, and the men would sit out in the middle of the chicken yard, which was a pretty sizable chicken yard, but there was this big old oak tree out there, and they generally stacked wood up against that tree, carrying it out in tiers to burn in the wintertime. And they would sit underneath that old oak tree waiting for breakfast or for lunch to be ready. And they'd sit there and whittle and chew tobacco and spit and that kind of thing. And they'd talk. And I was always curious about what was going on. So I'd kind of walk up around there, and pretty soon my granddad would say to me, "Now you just go on, tend to your business. We're talking about business over here and you're not involved." Well, that kind of upset me some, but I always found something to do. And I couldn't turn that old man down for anything, because he's the one that picked me up and took me out with a .22 rifle, and I could just barely hold that thing up and look down the barrel, let alone sight. But that was my grandfather and I. And those 5 brothers and my mother did a pretty good job on me at that time. And of course I've degenerated from that since then. But anyhow, I appreciated that, because I found out after a period of time that they were talking about Masons. I didn't know what a Mason was, but the way they talked about it, I just knew it was something mysterious and something that I wanted to do. And of course I got into my teens and I kind of got away from that, and ended up joining the Navy. And I was active in the USO activities down in Pensacola, Florida, where my first duty station was. And there was an old gentleman down there that walked around with a ring on his finger, and I asked him, I said, "What do you have to do to be a Mason?" He said, "Where's your hometown?" And I told him. He says, "Well, we'd like to have you here, but you'd probably be better off if you got it at your hometown." So I sat down and wrote my grandfather a letter. Said, "What do I have to do to be a Mason?" And a couple of weeks later I got a letter back, and all it had in it was a short note. He didn't waste any time on anything. It was just a short note on there, and he says, "You're going to be initiated into the Masons a Friday after Thanksgiving. Be there." And there was a petition attached. And so I signed it. I filled out what I thought I could figure out, but I signed it, and I knew he'd finish it up, and I made point to be at take some leave and go home from Pensacola down up to a little town named Xenia. That little country lodge was known as a moon lodge. And the reason why they call them a moon lodge was that their lodge night was always on a full moon. And the reason for that was that they would leave town in the afternoon and go into lodge, and they'd hold lodge, and then they'd drive their horses and buggies, or ride their horses, or drive their cars if they had one, home by way of the moonlight. But to get to the point, I was raised in that little country lodge. It was Xenia, Illinois Lodge. I used to know that number by heart, but the lodge was located on the second floor of a hardware store in that little country town. And it was a pretty sizable building. But anyhow, that lodge was packed every month. And those gentlemen gave me the 3rd degree on my 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degrees. And I was really initiated outright by a bunch of country folks that just had a good time and taught me a lot of lessons. And I knew right then that Masonry was something that you had to get serious about. That hardware store caught fire one night and burned slap to the ground. It was a brick building, and everything caved in on everything. So needless to say, the membership moved to another lodge to a neighboring town, Flora, Illinois, and that's my home lodge at Flora, Illinois. Number 204. I've sat in that lodge in Flora one time, and that's the only Illinois Masonry I've ever participated in, because once I was a Mason, I started visiting in Pensacola. I visited in New Jersey and California and Tokyo, Japan, and the Philippines. And I got started for a visit to the Australian Lodge. And on the way to Australia, one of our Navy ships, a destroyer, drove in front of an aircraft carrier against all orders. The Admiral explicitly told him, you will never cross my path when this aircraft carrier is recovering airplanes within 2 miles of me, or I guarantee you I'll cut you in two. Well, that's exactly what happened. They cut a destroyer in two, and in the process of doing what needed to be done to pick up what could be salvaged and get it back to the Philippines. Of course, by the time I got to back to the Philippines where I could get some more leave and head for Australia, it was too late because we were underway headed back to sea, and it just didn't work out. So I still regret that I didn't manage to do that. But most of the places that I've ever been stationed, I always made it a point to visit the lodges, and I can guarantee you that Masonry is a universal organization. And anybody that joins it and even attends just a meeting, whether they work or not, are going to gain something from it. But let me guarantee you that the more you work in it, the better you like it, and the more you resolve to be a better man.